What would you do if your body were as fragile as glass? The fear of shattering with every step, a danger with every touch, a risk with every movement. How would you walk? How would you sit? Could you get close to anyone? In the late 14th century, King Charles VI of France lived exactly this. From the mid-1390s, he began to believe he was made of glass, and this belief changed him. He rebuilt his palace. He kept everyone away. He controlled everything. He allowed no one to come near. Because glass is fragile, yes, but it's also special, valuable, something that must be protected. And Charles froze his entire world to protect himself. Today, I'm going to tell you the story of a king who experienced one of the strangest mental conditions in history. But it's also the story of how fear can freeze a person, how the need for control can turn into a prison cell. Charles grew up in the shadow of his uncles until the age of 21, when he ascended to the throne in 1380 at 11 years old. France was in the middle of the 100 Years' War. His 4 uncles divided the state among themselves. Charles only watched. For 10 years. Then at 21 he took power. He was a brilliant king at that time. He organized the bureaucracy, reduced corruption. He showed promise. But in the summer of 1392, everything changed. August 1392, a forest near Le Mans, Charles had set out at the head of his army. But he was only chasing a fugitive, a man who had escaped from prison. The man who had attempted to assassinate his closest friend, Olivier de Clisson. The road was hot and dusty. The forest was cool, but the air was stifling. At the front of the procession, a man appeared at the side of the road. Tattered clothes, long hair, dark eyes, neither soldier nor peasant. Charles lowered his horse. The man called out to him, "Do not go, king. Stop. You are too fragile. If you go, you will be betrayed." The procession hesitated. The nobles were confused. Charles leaned slightly from his horse, looking at the man. No one understood anything. Then Charles straightened up. He continued on his way. About half an hour later, they were passing through an open field. A spearman dozed off and dropped his spear. The spear struck armor, making a sharp sound. Charles jumped. He drew his sword and began attacking the nobles around him. "Treason! They're trying to kill me!" His brother barely escaped, but Charles didn't stop. He killed 4 knights. Then he collapsed from exhaustion. When he came to, he remembered nothing. After this, the episodes repeated. Sometimes they lasted for days. Sometimes he was quite healthy. Sometimes they came suddenly. The change had now begun, because Charles was a different person now. And after a while, he began to live with one of the strangest beliefs the human mind can produce. He believed he was made of glass. Though this idea grew within Charles, its first signs began to appear a year after the forest incident in 1393, when Charles started saying strange things. He shouted at a servant entering his room, "Don't come closer, step back." The servant was confused. The king was standing, solid, but he had extended his hand forward, speaking in a sharp tone. "Your Majesty, I told you not to come near. Can't you see? You'll break me." The servant retreated. The king watched him with anger. At first, the court thought this was part of Charles's episode, something temporary, but it didn't pass. Charles wasn't just talking strangely anymore. He was determining who could approach, who could touch, what could be placed where, everything. In January 1393, a ball was held at the palace. Charles and 5 nobles had dressed in wild men costumes. Linen glued to their bodies, resin spread over it, feathers added. Entertainment, dancing, wine, then a spark. The costumes ignited instantly. 5 people were engulfed in flames. 4 nobles burned right there, their screams filling the hall. Charles was saved thanks to the Duchesse de Berry. The woman threw her skirt over the king, extinguishing the flames. But Charles never forgot that night. For weeks he couldn't sleep. He feared fire, candles, heat. And one day, looking in the mirror, he thought, "This body can burn. It can break. It can shatter." But glass wasn't the only delusion. Sometimes he believed he was a wolf. He would run through the palace corridors, chasing servants and guards, growling, barking, Once he forgot he was king. He didn't even know what his name was. For 5 months, he refused to bathe. He wouldn't change his clothes. Servants insisted, but Charles refused, because he feared being touched. He feared his servants might accidentally break him. According to historical records, Charles first openly expressed this belief around 1395. He told his doctors, "I am made of glass. If someone bumps into me, I will shatter." The doctors were astonished. At first they thought he was joking, but Charles looked serious. He was looking at himself with the expression of someone examining their hands. Then he added, but this time in a different tone, "That's why no one will approach me. I will reorganize the palace." The court understood. Charles was no longer someone to consult. Approaching meant danger. Charles issued a series of orders to protect himself. First, his clothes were changed. Instead of normal fabrics, he had iron rods sewn into his clothes. Supports were placed from his shoulders to his waist, down to his feet, because he thought he would break if he bent. And no one had the right to make him bend. The iron rods kept him upright. No one could bend him. No one could see him as weak. His body was now like a fortress. But this wasn't enough. When servants dressed him, they couldn't touch his skin even with a single finger. Every movement was calculated to the millimeter. Clothes were placed on him with extreme care, as if dressing a glass object. He ordered thick cushions placed under every chair he sat on. He wanted cushions spread on every floor he walked on. Every corner of his private chambers at Hotel St. Paul was covered with soft materials. Servants had to walk silently when approaching him, because a sudden sound, a sudden movement could make Charles feel threatened. And if he felt threatened, he would attack, because to protect glass, one must harden. Over time, Charles stopped moving. He no longer walked the palace corridors. Corridors were uncontrollable. Someone could appear, attack, collide. He didn't attend balls. Crowds were chaotic. Someone could push him, touch him, put him in danger. He didn't come to meetings. In meetings, others would speak. Others would make decisions. Most of the time he sat in his room, motionless, silent. Sometimes he remained in the same position for hours. If he stood up, there was a risk of falling. If he walked, there was a chance of tripping. If he approached someone, their movement was unpredictable. The world had frozen. And Charles's glass body was safe. But this safety had also become a prison. France was still at war. The 100 Years' War continued. The English were entering territories. Soldiers were calling, but Charles didn't go. He couldn't. The nobles insisted. "Your Majesty, the army needs your leadership." Charles shook his head. "No," he said, "I cannot go." And so the King of France, in his country's darkest period, sat in his palace, motionless, safe, but lost. Charles wouldn't let anyone touch him, not even his wife Isabeau. When she tried to embrace him, he wouldn't allow it, stopping her. Isabeau would retreat in confusion. When he wanted to see his children, he watched them from a distance. He didn't hold them. He didn't let them approach. One day, his youngest son came running toward him. Charles suddenly stood up and shouted, "Stop! Don't come near me." The child froze. He looked at his father with fear. Charles didn't comfort him. He couldn't, because in that moment the child had become a threat, an uncontrolled variable, and Charles didn't allow anything out of control. Over time, no one dared to touch him. Not just to touch, even to approach. Charles wanted this, because untouchability was also power. No one could reach him. No one could affect him. He was a glass fortress, fragile, but also unreachable. But even the simplest actions had turned into torture. Eating, for example. Charles moved extremely slowly when eating. His hand trembled as he brought the fork to his mouth, controlling every movement. Sometimes he gave up eating, because the fork or spoon might strike his lips, which could harm him. Servants offered to feed him, but Charles refused this too. Someone else's movement couldn't be controlled, so he lost weight. He grew thin. Doctors worried. But there was nothing they could do. After a while, Charles also stopped looking in mirrors, because when he saw himself in the mirror, he thought he really saw glass. One day, a servant brought a new mirror into the room. When Charles saw it, he shouted in panic, "Take it away! I don't want to see it! Take it away! It shows me! It shows my fragility!" "Take it away." The mirror was removed, and he never looked in a mirror again, because confronting reality, instead of shaking his belief in the delusion, only deepened it. The most interesting aspect was that Charles had a partial sense of reality. That is, he wasn't completely insane. When he wasn't having episodes, he understood state affairs, he remembered the past, he could speak logically, he recognized people. But his belief that he was made of glass never changed. This is known in modern psychiatry as monothematic delusion, meaning a person can behave normally in every area of life but in one subject. Just one subject, they are delusional. Charles's condition was exactly this. He was a king. He was a father. He was a husband. But at the same time, he was made of glass. Charles's wife, Isabeau, was one of those who suffered most. She could no longer have a normal relationship with her husband. She couldn't embrace him. He didn't allow touching. Even when she spoke, he remained distant. When she went to him at night, Charles would panic. "Stay away, you're shaking the bed." "I'll fall." Isabeau would retreat. She would cry. But she couldn't tell anyone, because she was the queen, and queens didn't cry. Over time, Isabeau began forming other relationships at court. A closeness developed with Duke Louis of Orleans. Some sources claim there was a relationship between them. Was it true? Maybe. But Isabeau's only crime was wanting to be loved. And her husband couldn't give her that, because glass couldn't embrace. Everyone around him saw Charles's mental condition, but no one could tell him because they were afraid. If they told Charles the truth, they could be killed, or at least they could be expelled from court, so they remained silent. They accepted Charles's delusions. They acted as if it were normal, and so the king remained alone inside his mind. No one told him the truth. No one helped him, because leaving a king imprisoned in his own mind was easier than confronting him. Charles had 12 children born, but he couldn't establish a father-child relationship with any of them. He saw them, but from a distance. He spoke, but without touching. As the children grew, their father became just a name to them, a ghost, a portrait, but not a real person. Especially his youngest son, the future Charles VII, barely knew his father. He grew up in the palace for years, but no bond formed between him and his father. And perhaps that's why, years later when he became king, he was such a cold and distant leader, because he too didn't know love. Because Charles was condemned to immobility, state affairs also stopped. He didn't attend meetings, he didn't receive ambassadors, he didn't sign decisions. His uncles and princes took advantage of this opportunity. A power struggle began between the Duke of Burgundy and the Duke of Orleans. France was divided in two: Armagnacs, Orleans supporters, Burgundians. Civil war broke out. Blood ran in the streets, and Charles sat in his room, surrounded by cushions, motionless. In 1407, his brother Duke Louis of Orleans was ambushed in the streets of Paris. Burgundian assassins tore him apart. When the news was given to Charles, there was a long silence. Then Charles moved to another topic, as if nothing had happened. His brother's death seemed to leave no significant mark on his mind. Or perhaps he had already lost so much that one more loss was just a detail. In 1415, English King Henry V invaded France. At the Battle of Agincourt, the French army was destroyed. Thousands of nobles died. France's military power collapsed. Charles was not at this battle because he couldn't go to war. In 1420, one of the most shameful treaties in French history was signed, the Treaty of Troyes. With this treaty, English King Henry V was declared the next king of France. Charles's own son, the future Charles VII, was disinherited. France was surrendered to England. Charles VI signed this treaty, but under great pressure from the Burgundians and his wife Isabeau. Historians note that Charles's mental state was very poor at that time, and he couldn't fully grasp the true meaning of the treaty. Perhaps he signed it. Perhaps he didn't care. Perhaps he just sat quietly thinking about something else. Because his mind was no longer concerned with France. It was only concerned with one thing, not breaking. In October 1422, Charles became increasingly invisible. He was alone in his room most of the time. Servants rarely saw him. Sometimes there was silence for days. Some mornings, Charles would sit in front of the window, looking outside but saying nothing. Sometimes he would hold his hands and look at them for a long time, as if trying to understand something. Then he would become motionless again. On October 21st, 1422, in the early morning hours, Charles died. The cause isn't exactly known. Records say prolonged illness, some say mental exhaustion. But in reality, Charles had been dying for years. Every passing day, he moved a little further away from the world, from people, from himself. Finally, there was nothing left to hold on to. Charles's funeral was magnificent. He was buried in the Basilica of St. Denis, the cemetery of French kings. But very few people attended the ceremony. Because France was in civil war, Paris was in English hands, and no one cared about Charles anymore. He had been dead for years anyway. His body just followed him in 1422. Modern psychiatry calls Charles's condition glass delusion. This is one of the first known examples in history. But why glass? Psychologists propose several theories. 1. The paradox between value and danger glass was one of the most valuable materials of that era. The wealthy used glass objects. Palaces were decorated with glass mirrors. Glass was a symbol of wealth and sophisticated living. But at the same time, it was the most dangerous material. It broke easily. One blow was enough. Charles felt both valuable and threatened. As a king, everyone showed him respect. But at the same time, everyone could exploit him. Glass perfectly represented this duality. It was valuable, but vulnerable. And Charles responded to this vulnerability by hardening. 2. Control obsession. Charles had spent most of his life being controlled. As a child, his uncles had ruled him. As a young king, advisors had made decisions. After his mental collapse, he could no longer control anything. The glass delusion gave him a kind of absolute control. If he was glass, people had to treat him carefully. They asked him, they sought his permission, they stopped before approaching him. This paradoxically gave him power. Now he set the rules. 3. Paranoid defense mechanism. The 1393 fire was a turning point for Charles. He saw his friends burn to death. He heard their screams, he smelled it. This idea formed in his mind. The world is dangerous. Everyone can harm me. And this thought gradually transformed into, I must protect myself. I can't trust anyone. The glass delusion legitimized this paranoia. Now Charles had an excuse to keep people away. Saying, don't come near me, I'm made of glass, was actually saying, I don't trust you, but it was easier to say. It was less accusatory. And thus, the delusion became a shield. Interestingly, after Charles, glass delusion spread throughout Europe. In the 5th, 10th, and 16th centuries, many people believed they were made of glass. Some were kings, some were nobles, some were ordinary people. In historical records, there are stories of people who believed their buttocks were made of glass, those who always placed cushions before sitting, those who didn't approach anyone, like Charles. A Dutch princess didn't walk for years, believing she had glass legs. An Italian poet didn't leave his house, saying he was a glass bottle. And perhaps most interestingly, Princess Alexandra Amalie of Bavaria. She lived in the 1840s. In her childhood, she believed she had swallowed a glass piano, so she approached every piano she encountered very carefully, because it shouldn't harm her, so as not to break the piano inside her. This is one of the last known examples of glass delusion. After the 19th century, cases gradually decreased. In the 20th century, it was almost never seen, because metaphors changed. People no longer see themselves as glass, but they still feel fragile. They just express it with different words. Today, glass delusion is almost never seen, but some think they're robots. Some say they're devices. Delusion takes shape according to culture. In Charles's time, glass was fragile. Today, perhaps our minds are fragile. Charles is remembered as a terrible king, but he's also remembered as a victim of mental illness. His story teaches us this: the mind is more fragile than the body. And sometimes, even the most powerful people can get lost inside their own minds. The story of Charles VI is tragic, but at the same time it's extremely human. He was born as a king, but he died as a human, Throughout his life, he feared breaking. And ironically, this fear truly broke him. Today, 600 years later, we still tell his story, because he wasn't just a patient. He was a symbol of how fragile the human mind is. And perhaps that's why we call him the Glass King, because he really was made of glass. But not physically, mentally. And the mind is the most fragile substance.